Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. My guest today is held in great esteem in the halls of higher education, not just because she's a former college president, but she challenges all of us in higher education to think more inclusively. She's a scholar, a teacher, an author, an administrator, and a race relations expert. Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum became the 9th president of Spelman College in Atlanta in 2002. She retired in 2015 as the president emerita. She's now focusing on her work as an author, speaker, and expert on issues related to racial identity. She's also the former acting president of Mount Holyoke College in South Hadley, Massachusetts, where she also served as a professor of psychology and education. Her new book, Peril and Promise, College Leadership in Turbulent Times, is out now. Beverly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm delighted to be with you.
We have so much to talk about, but I have to start because if you're one of my students, you've heard me talk about this example in my classes regarding the bold decision that you made back at Spelman, I don't know, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, to drop college athletics. And I'm just going to let a mic drop hit right there because people would think that's heretic. You shouldn't be doing that. But walk us through what your observations were, how you got campus buy-in, all of those kinds of things.
Sure. Well, let me start by saying that when I arrived at Spelman in 2002 as the new president, I thought we should be involved in NCAA intercollegiate athletics.
Yeah.
And worked hard to help us get our Division III status. We did not have it when I arrived. We were in the process and completed that process and joined a conference, and off to the races we were doing intercollegiate athletics. About 4 or 5 years into that experience, something happened. Our conference fell apart. As your listeners may know or may not, in NCAA Division III, there are no scholarships involved. Students who are participating in Division III athletics are really doing it for the love of the sport. They are not being recruited to campus with a scholarship. They might be eager to play on your campus, but there's no financial incentive for them to do so.
Right.
And you have to be part of a conference, and that conference has to have at least 7 different teams in it. And so 7 different institutions. In our conference, we only had 7, and 3 of them were co-ed schools, and 4 of them were women's colleges. So perhaps not surprisingly, the 3 co-ed schools decided at some point that they wanted to be in a different conference because they had football teams, and they wanted more football competition than our conference would allow. And that created a problem for the 4 women's colleges because now we were only 4, not big enough to be a conference, and we had to be in a conference to be involved with NCAA. So this is the problem that was presented to me by my athletic director. What are we going to do about our conference? And the first response I had was, well, we'll find another one. Easier said than done, as it turns out.
Yeah.
And that in order to be in competition, of course, your teams have to travel to other schools, and to join a conference, our teams were going to have to travel further away. Anyway, I asked the athletic director how much we were spending now and how much this cost would likely increase if we had to increase our travel. I was very surprised by the answer that we were spending something close to $1 million on our athletic program. And that might seem like just a pittance if you're a big Division I school. But when I looked at how many students were participating, it was a relatively small number. It was averaging about 20 students per class year. Spelman is a school of about 2,500 students. Today, back then, it was maybe 2,100. And so 20 students in each class of 500 or 550 was, just a small percentage. And when I added up the cost per student, it was $10,000 or more. And I thought to myself, is this the best use of our resources? That was the first question. And then I wondered why there were so few students participating in the intercollegiate program. Why was that? And when I started doing some research about it, what I learned was that young Black women, generally speaking, are pretty sedentary in their activities. In fact, there had been a study done by NIH which had shown that young Black women were among the most sedentary of all adolescents in the United States. And as a consequence of that sedentary habit, they were at risk for illnesses at a young age, like high blood pressure, obesity, breast cancer, other things that are related to lifestyle, other illnesses that are related to lifestyle. And I thought we should really be trying to interrupt that. We are preparing these young women for lives of service and leadership. We want them to have long, healthy lives.
Mhm.
And what would it mean to help them develop habits of wellness? So I was thinking about this. We had a wellness program on our campus, but it was hampered by the fact that it was in competition with our intercollegiate teams for space. The prime activity time was being taken up in the gym by practice teams, and the wellness programs were marginalized on the side. So I was thinking about all of this when I was sitting watching a basketball game on the campus. Our team was on the field. There were five students playing, maybe five on the bench. There were very few people in the stands. So I was watching this, I was thinking to myself, none of these young women are going to be playing basketball after they graduate, in all likelihood. Not just professionally, but even recreationally.
Yeah.
They'd be likely doing other things. And it occurred to me that what we were really doing with our program was extending high school activity.
Mm.
And maybe we would be better off not extending high school activity, but preparing students for their adult activities,
Mm.
their adult fitness activities like Zumba classes and tennis and swimming and running and, participating in 5Ks and things like that. That the adult women I knew, professional women who had careers, found time to do as part of their lives and maintaining their health and wellness. And so it occurred to me that maybe we should, a little voice said, flip it. Maybe we should take those resources, that $1 million we were spending on intercollegiate activity, and invest it in our wellness initiative that could benefit all of our students. And so with that idea, I began exploring what would it mean if we left and invested in all of the students, not just those 20 students a year who wanted to play intercollegiately. And that's what we did. We decide you could ask, "How did I get the buy-in for that?"
Yes.
Well, I explained it just as I did to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
I explained it to the faculty, I explained it to our trustees, I explained it to the students.
Mhm.
Now, I will say that those few those intercollegiate athletes were not happy with me. When I told them that after vetting the idea with the faculty and the board, getting buy-in from that part of our community, I then presented pretty much as a done deal to the students that we had made this decision to withdraw from NCAA, not that year or even the next year, but we were having this conversation in fall and into the spring of 2012. We
Okay.
were going to have our actual last season be at the spring of 2013.
Okay.
So for the students who were seniors graduating in 2012, no impact on them. The students who were juniors graduating in 2013, no impact on them. It was those first years and sophomores who would be impacted by the discontinuation of our athletic program, and they were not happy. And some of them said, if there's no intercollegiate activity, I'm going to transfer. And of
Mhm.
course, I worried that it might impact our enrollment capacity. But I think it was really important to frame this as not something that was going away, but as the thing that was coming, the wellness activity that was going to be revolutionary for the health of those students and the communities that they would influence. Spelman was founded in 1881 by two women who saw themselves as revolutionaries, educational revolutionaries, and creating, they were two white women from the Northeast Massachusetts who came to Atlanta in 1881 to start a school for Black women. You can imagine right after the end of the Civil War, practically,
Yes.
it was not something that many people thought was a good idea in Atlanta, but
Yes.
they were persistent and they were successful in establishing this school. And their idea was that the women they educated would educate others, that there would be, in fact, and was, a literacy revolution
Mm.
in terms of the influence of those Spelman graduates. And in the same way, we talked about creating a wellness revolution that if our students came to really understand what it means to be more active, to improve your health and eating and sleep habits. We used to say, move more, eat well, move more, eat better, sleep well. That if you could do those 3 things, you would improve your health for a lifetime, and you could influence the outcome of whole communities in the same way that the early graduates introduced literacy. So thinking about it as part of the Spelman tradition of community impact and thinking about the needs of our student population combined in a way that really allowed us to present this as something important and new that everyone could embrace and feel good about.
That's a great history. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm thinking 1881, that was just after Reconstruction or in the middle of
In
Reconstruction?
the
What?
middle, in the middle.
Okay, which there's a lot of tension around a whole host of things at that
Yes.
particular time. It was particularly brave of those two women to do this. So I heard you talk about this. You came up to the University of Pennsylvania and gave a chat with us back then. And I thought it was so revolutionary. What was the response of your peers, of your fellow conference members, donors, those types of things?
Well, so it's a great question. And I found that once we made this decision, what was remarkable was the amount of media attention we got. That was not something that I anticipated. But as it turns out, Spelman was one of the first institutions in anyone's memory to voluntarily leave NCAA.
Yes.
And that landed us on the front page of the New York Times, which was amazing to me.
Yeah.
Uh, and I did many interviews, NPR phone interviews and other even the BBC called me. And so that visibility then triggered questions from other presidential colleagues
Hmm.
who called to ask, well, tell me more about what you're doing. Why are you doing it? And even people who, I want to acknowledge that there's some campuses where this would not have been a good idea
Yeah.
because because the importance of athletics to the culture and to the student body. I mean, there's some campuses where 50% of the students are involved in physical intercollegiate activities, and that would have been quite disruptive in that context. But but there were people who were very interested in the wellness dimension of what we were doing and wanting to know more about it. And even since leaving the presidency, I still occasionally get calls from institutions that are now looking at the finances associated with athletics
Yes.
and who are wondering whether it is the best use of their resources and whether a similar change might be in their future. So I do get questions still who are curious about how to do it. And I'm happy to report that donors really rallied around it in ways that, again, I didn't anticipate. But one very generous foundation in particular told me that they really liked the fact that we were stopping something, not just adding something. A
Okay.
lot of times when you're searching for funds, it's because you want to do something new, but it's adding to the bottom line of your operations
Hmm.
as opposed to substituting or replacing something. So this idea that we had made a conscious choice to not do something and to make a better investment, perhaps in all of our students, really impressed this particular foundation. And they were very generous to us because part of what we needed to do was to upgrade our fitness facility. The building had been originally constructed in 1950 when the campus only had 500 students. Fast forward to, 2011, now a campus of 2,000, the gym really was not adequate to provide really it wasn't adequate for the intercollegiate program, really, but
Right.
it certainly wasn't enough space and design to support a 21st century wellness program. So it became clear that in order to bring our idea to true vision, and to bring it to fruition, we would need a new facility. That was not in the strategic plan. My board said, is this, what are you up to, Beverly? But what they said was, if you can raise the money, you can build a building. And we agreed that there would not be one shovel in the ground until we had all the money. And within 18 months to 2 years, we did have all the money. And it came very quickly because donors were excited about the vision of the wellness initiative.
Yeah, and it really separated Spelman from many peers. There's no doubt about it that for African American women who came to school there, it was a different experience. You could be part of a different culture that was not focused on athletics. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things we did in the first year, as I said, we wanted to emphasize not just what we were losing, but what we were gaining. And so we wanted to do something that would really mark community engagement. And so we created a 5K. We called it Founders Day 5K, the Founders Day 5K. The college was founded on April 11th, which in Atlanta is a beautiful time of year. You know, things are blooming, the weather's warm, and the idea, and it's always celebrated. You know, there's always a Founders Day celebration. And so one of my team members had this idea that we could have a Founders Day 5K. And starting in January, when kids came back from this winter break, we started announcing about this coming 5K in April. And there was an initiative that our athletic team put together titled From the Couch to the 5K, helping people get ready so that you could participate. If not running, then walking the 5K. And we had T-shirts, and it was very exciting that day. And I was at the front of the line. And that picture actually was in the New York Times of all of these students, hundreds of students lining up to go through the neighborhood. We mapped out this 5K. It was a lot of fun. But it galvanized a kind of excitement that, you know, moving is good. You can do this collectively. And even if you want to play on a team, we can have intramural teams, but also there are activities that you can do with others that will allow you to enjoy yourself and their company and build community without necessarily focusing on the travel and the competition associated with them.
I think that's a point that is lost by so many presidents when they think about what if we drop athletics or we drop those sports, what are those students going to do? They're just going to leave us. But in many ways, you filled that gap and helped them see what the new possibilities are rather than
Yes.
just the traditional way of going from high school to college and that type of thing. When you talk to your colleagues who are calling you saying, how's it going? Did it work? Should we think about this? Could they see that, or were they more worried about the backlash? What was your sense of those conversations?
Think some of both, you know, I mean, certainly there are questions often, and as I said, I still get them sometimes about, you know, just the logistics. You know, how did we go about it? What did we offer? You know, what the vision was, and I'm always happy to share that. But as I said, some communities have more investment in an athletic part of the campus culture than others. So, you know, for example, there are institutions today that are trying to add athletics because they want to draw more male students, right?
Absolutely.
You know, I can think of at least a couple of schools that added football teams at great expense, I might add, because they think football is a draw for male students. And as we know, men are not going to college at the same rates as young women are these days. And so they think of that as a strategy. Whether it has been a successful strategy, I can't comment on, but I do know that it takes a lot of resources.
It does.
And so therefore the question is, particularly in this time of resource constraint, is this the best way to use our dollars?
I think that's fundamentally the question that nearly every president is asking right now because with all this uncertainty around funding for the institution, and honestly, it's been an eye-opening experience for me to listen as to how much every institution depends on federal funding, in
Yes.
some way, shape, or form. And we've sort of built that into our budget planning models over the years that that's going to be there. And if it's suddenly not there, or if it's greatly reduced, it causes presidents to really think, where can we make a difference? And I had an interesting podcast conversation with Father Malachi Van Tassel. He is the president of St. Francis University in Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
announced in the spring that their campus of 2,000 students, which was playing in Division One,
Hmm.
decided we can't do it anymore because the travel's too big and all that, and they're
Yeah.
moving to Division Three.
Yes.
And actually, ABC News just the other night did an 8-minute feature on what the impact was on the school and that type of thing. Some coaches left, other people retired, the kind of trauma around that.
Mhm.
But what you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that there's an opportunity here to refocus the finances and the mission of campus if you do something different in this space.
Yes. I think that it is interesting to look at the history of higher education,
Yes,
and athletics has not always been a part of it, right?
that's right.
You know, it has not always been a part. We think of it as, a natural thing, but it hasn't always been the case. And there are some institutions that have chosen not to go down that path. I'm thinking of a school I know about in Georgia that is relatively new, and they decided not to have athletics because their student body is largely adult commuters and doesn't make sense in that context.
Right.
But even in that context, you might think about a wellness initiative, where people learn how to de-stress and manage their health in ways that allow them to take full advantage of their educational experience for the long term.
And one thing I was on Spelman's website to kind of get an update on what they were doing with this program.
Yes.
And it sounds like they're now incorporating video sessions so the students can do some of this work in their dorm rooms or in their apartments off campus. So they don't have to come to physically come to campus. They can still participate.
Yes, yes. And certainly that's, one of the benefits, if we can use that term, of the COVID era is that we've all learned to do things over Zoom. And so, but I have been very encouraged. Every now and then I will get a note or read something about the program at Spelman, and I've been very pleased to see that it has continued to evolve in ways that benefit students.
Yeah, yeah. And I get the sense that they're trying to elevate the competitiveness of their intramurals program as well.
Yes,
And
yes,
that's people do like that. And as you well know, on many of these large land grant institutions, they have very robust intramural programs.
yes,
70 different sports they're playing to try to be more inclusive,
yes,
just the Division One programs.
yes,
So you and I were going back and forth a little earlier today about some of these articles that are coming out about higher education and the downward spiral that the media insists that we are undergoing right now. I would rather classify it as transformation. And since
yes.
you've led transformations, what are some of your thoughts about where higher education is today and how we can address some of these legitimate demographic issues as well as financial issues?
Well, I think that there are many challenges. The title of my book is Peril and Promise, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of peril in the context of just, rising costs and changing. There you go. Thank you. Rising costs and changing relationship between higher education and the federal government.
Yes.
I think that is a surprise to many of us. I certainly didn't see it coming in the way that it has manifested since the inauguration of our current president. But the reality is that higher education still matters. One of the things that I included in my book when I was working on it was reference to the Truman Commission, which goes back to 1948 after
Yes.
the end of World War II. And President Truman um, put together this commission to look at the role of higher education in American society. And the report that came back lifted up three areas, which I think are really important in this particular moment. Think about this. They were doing that work right at the end of World War II, catastrophic worldwide conflict. One of the things they said was really important about higher education was the opportunity it presented for international cooperation in terms of students studying abroad in either direction, the ways in which you can build bridges or what we sometimes refer to as soft diplomacy.
Mm.
And we know that that is currently challenged in the United States by the limitations on international students and the general climate around uh, international immigration. But having said that, this idea that there's an opportunity to learn from people different from yourself in the context of higher education, not only internationally, but even domestically, learning across difference, I think is a really important aspect of higher education that we don't talk about enough. And then they also talked about, again, critical at this particular moment, about the role of higher education in the service of a strong democracy, educating people to be informed citizens participating actively in a healthy democracy is certainly something that we know historically has been one of the benefits of higher education. College graduates are more likely to vote, for example,
Mhm.
more likely to be engaged in community service, more likely to volunteer. There are lots of benefits for the public good that come out of an increasingly educated citizenry. But the third thing they talked about, again, critical at this moment, is what happens when you bring together creative imagination, smart people engaged in active investigation of problems that need solving. And as we know, we live in a time where so much is changing so rapidly. The introduction of artificial intelligence, that changing in the climate, the mobility, the global mobility of people moving across borders, all of these things are questions that need addressing, not to mention all the, scientific discoveries that have happened in the last half century and all of this, but has come as a result of bringing smart people together with disciplinary investigation and for creative problem solving. And so much of the conversation about higher education is often defined in terms of private good. Will you get a job? How much will you earn?
Yes. Yes.
You go to college without any discussion of the public good that is coming from a cohort of young in each generation, a cohort of people in each generation who have learned to think critically, to be effective problem solvers, and also have learned how to engage with people different from themselves. It's very hard to think of where else that can happen. Certainly, if you go into the military, you will learn how to engage with people different from yourself.
Sure. Yeah.
But are you doing the same kind of creative problem solving in a military structure? I have never served in the military, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking maybe not. When people say, well, you don't need to go to college, you can get a job out of high school, you can. And I'm thinking of a family I know, two sons. One is a machinist, went into that role right out of high school and apprenticed and has a job that he enjoys, makes a living wage comfortably, bought a house of his own, doing all the developmental milestones that you would hope a young person would be able to do. But I wonder, 10 years from now, maybe not even that long, will that job be a job that's being done by an automated robot? Was that an AI job that's
Yeah.
gonna the other child in that same family went to college, onto medical school, now is working as a psychiatrist and doing very well in that role. And I think, maybe erroneously, that that child has a better has more longevity in terms of that career path as a result of the advanced education. Does that mean everyone needs to go to medical school? Certainly not. But what I do think we need to understand is that there are things that students are getting from their education post high school that not only benefits them in the long term, but also benefits our society.
Those are all such great points. And every day I see all of us concerned about what AI's potential is and how we should use it in the classroom. Are our students going to rely completely on it to do their thinking for them? But one argument that I saw the other day, which I thought was really good, was that, and it was interesting. It was in a Wall Street Journal, actually. I think they talked about the fact that no longer are you going to be able to charge for billable hours because the person who's hiring you is expecting you that you're going to use AI. But instead, you'll be able to charge for what your outcome and decision making is in
Mhm.
that. And that's the value of what you will bring to the table. I thought, wow, that's really interesting because so much of higher education is about working your way, doing your research, finding it out for yourself, and then
Yes.
deriving conclusions. How do you respond to that?
Well, I it's an interesting thing. I was listening to podcast on a different topic, but the person was saying that if you use billable hours, better you get at something, the less time you spend. And therefore,
It's
if you're
true.
billing by the hour, the more efficient you are, the less you're going to earn, right? Which is ironic. And
Yes.
so that person was making the case for the individual who's doing the work that, much as you said, the focus should be on what you have delivered.
Yeah.
right? Maybe it only took you 5 minutes to deliver it because you're such an expert, but the value of what you've delivered is what you need to be charging for,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's the entrepreneur's side of that argument, but but I do think that there is something about the humanistic quality of the work that people do that makes it meaningful, right? Whatever the problems are that you're solving, whatever the product is that you're delivering, part of what you're delivering is your humanity, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
That's
That's
part of what you're delivering, and I think that is important for us to remember the value of the humanity that comes with whatever that is.
so. As we wrap up our conversation, I want to bring back one of your great examples in the book about saying thank you to the people who worked on at Spelman's campus. Can you talk us through what you did and how meaningful it was to your employees?
Yes. So when I first arrived at Spelman, there was a campus tradition about thanking employees through the giving of gifts. And those gifts were particularly related to the holidays. Turkeys at Thanksgiving, hams at Christmas. And it wasn't for everyone, but it was for the part of the population that was perhaps less well compensated, the groundskeepers and the administrative assistants. That had been the practice. And I felt uncomfortable with that practice and I didn't want to continue it. And so, in part because it didn't benefit everyone. And, I had other concerns about it, which I write about in the book. But I wanted to nonetheless appreciate and share my appreciation for the employees in some tangible way. And so I decided I would write a personal thank you note for each person. About 700 people. Took a long time. But I started early, and I have to say that I didn't think of this all by myself. I had met a college president who once told me that they did this, and
Oh,
that person told me that she started like at Labor Day, to write these notes. I didn't start that early, but probably around mid-October, I started writing these cards. And the feedback I got was so meaningful to me. People said, I really felt seen and appreciated. Thank you so much. I showed it to my family when the card came. It sits on my mantelpiece. It was with such pride. The president wrote me a
yeah.
personal note
Yeah.
thanking me. And it wasn't that I knew everyone's name even, but I had a list of employees and what their job titles were. And I tried to imagine how they spent their days. And so I would
Mm,
thank somebody for, helping the grounds look as beautiful as they did,
mhm.
or thank you for inspiring your students in the chemistry class you teach, or
Yeah.
whatever it might have been.
Yeah.
Um, all of which contributes to the success of our institution. And I found that people were so grateful and truly encouraged by these notes that I just did it every year. And when I retired after 13 years, I was just amazed how many people said, I have every one of those notes you sent me.
My gosh. That's great.
Yes, it
That's
was
great.
really, really touching.
Yeah, yeah, and that just adds to the feeling of community that I think particularly small campuses can create,
Yes,
and,
yes.
I really admire you for doing that. Yeah,
Well, I often recommend it to others. I know that if you're working with 50,000 people, it's probably not it's probably not possible, but particularly for those who work on small campuses,
yeah,
it is worth the time.
that's great, that's great. Well, Beverly, I am so grateful that you sat down with me. You sat down with some pretty high-powered interviewers, Oprah Winfrey and others, and I'm just honored that you would spend a few minutes with me and my audience, so thank you so much.
It's truly been my honor. Thank you for inviting me.